Hello, and welcome to Cultivating Disruptive Diversity. I'm Rajkumari Neogy. I spent my entire career in Silicon Valley. In fact, I like to say that I was born in a startup and then I graduated to Adobe and leveled up to Facebook. But when I left Facebook, I left because I was really curious about something. I wanted to find out why it is that we feel so disconnected within organizations, within our own teams, and even to some degree, if not to a big degree, ourselves. I spent years researching, taking the time to research with individuals and with teams to figure out why that is. And this is the culmination of all of that research. Disruptive diversity is all about self-worth. The technical definition is the ability to negotiate a strategy in order to meet a need. What I'd like to do is take the time with you today and unpack that a little bit further. So we've all been in this situation, right? And in fact, we've even been in a situation while the phone's ringing. And we're driving. And not only 3 hours earlier had we actually taken the time to coil it so perfectly that we would avoid finding ourselves in this exact situation. But let's for a moment task you with the situation of untangling these virtual wires. And let's remove the driving aspect and let's remove the phone ringing aspect. As you set to untangle these wires, do you find yourself in this category of emotion? Or perhaps you find yourself in this category, or maybe even in this category, or perhaps even this category. We feel our feelings for a reason. I like to say that they're clues, that they're actual breadcrumbs that lead us back to ourselves. Our feelings are the information that we get about the person, place, or thing. And that information, as we all know, are the stories. And stories are our beliefs. In fact, all the stories that we've told ourselves have led us to the compendium of our lives. We are exceptional storytellers. We're always telling stories. Whether we're inviting someone to join our team or we're upselling to a client, we're telling a story. Whether we're advocating for a new deadline because the current deadline doesn't work with the resources that we have available, we're telling a story. Whether we're going out on a date with someone who's brand new in our life or someone we've been with for 20 years, we're telling a story. I have a friend who I've known for quite some time, and when we speak, inevitably, the conversation winds its way back to his wife, who's always late, which renders him angry and frustrated and infuriated. Over time, his single story has now become, when my wife is late, I feel badly. And so they have these conversations constantly about her being on time and him feeling frustrated when she's not. And these conversations are about what? They're about her doing something differently so that he can feel differently, right? Be different so I can feel different. The truth is, my friend just wants to have fun. He wants to have a good time with his wife and with his friends and ultimately with himself. We all have a need for fun. We all have a need for friendships. We all have a need to feel welcome and supported and trusted. At a deeper level, we all have a need to feel safe and that we matter. And at the very core of it all, we have a need to belong. A need is something that is incredibly important or essential to you. Yeah? Over the course of my time in the Valley and doing all of the research with clients, I came to find that there were 5 core needs that were absolutely critical to their success. When these needs were met, all of them, they had tremendous professional and personal growth. And those 5 needs are connection, trust, participation, support, and integrity. And what made them incredibly successful was the strategy that they themselves were employing in order to get that need met. What I found was that each need had a spectrum, and on this spectrum there were basically two ends of strategies being employed. The more fluid, the greater the ability to vacillate on that spectrum created greater amount of success because they could pivot in the moment. So let's look at participation. Let's for a moment say that you're truly invited, you're welcomed into a project, into a group, into an event, and you find yourself showing up far more authentically because you feel safe. If on the other hand, you don't feel as warm about the situation or the people there, then you might be a little more reserved, right? A little more cautious about what's going on. And if that's the story, that's the experience that you're having, then you might walk away with the story of not feeling truly valued. On the flip side, however, if you did feel like you got to show up authentically and maybe you got some hugs and some laughter, maybe you got to say, hey, let's meet up for coffee later, then you might walk away with the story of feeling incredibly valued, that your contribution made an impact. Many of you already know that 95% of your thoughts are unconscious, and that 93% of your communication is nonverbal. This is how we're trending every single day as human beings. So if 95% of our thoughts are unconscious, then it makes perfect sense to me that our unconscious bias would be communicated 93% of the time, at least. We're so quick to go from our thought to our communication that we don't slow down enough to feel our feelings. And when we don't slow down enough, we get caught up in the single story. We've all had the experience where we've gone to a restaurant and the food's arrived and then the waiter shows up and does what? Actually says, how is everything? Do you need anything else? In that moment when the waiter is checking in with us, we feel attuned to, we feel attended to. But conversely, if we've had the experience where the waiter hasn't checked in with us, then we wonder what's going on and we're left wanting for some more water or some more salt because we find our food is bland. Our single story there might be, that waiter is totally incompetent, or the restaurant, a terrible service, or I'll never eat here again. This is the danger of subscribing to a single story. The key is to become adept at the waiter who is able to check in with us. When we become able to more fluidly check in with ourselves, then we can vacillate with greater ease on that spectrum and finding the appropriate strategy to employ at the right moment to get our needs met. Let's look a little further at the 5 needs. Now, connection is the beginning of it all, right? And on this spectrum, we find respect and hostility. Now, I want to take a moment here and just talk a little bit about this single story and hostility. Let's look at blame. Blame can certainly be subsumed under hostility, and probably most of us have felt blamed at some point in our lives. What's really important to understand about blame here is that blame is how the left hemisphere is able to integrate the environment around itself. Since it doesn't have a sense of self in that way, in order to make sense of what's around it, it has to blame, right? Blame is the most powerful integrative force for the left hemisphere. Where we feel our feelings, where we have access and wisdom about our body is in our right hemisphere. And in order to actually get from blame to the greater picture, the larger picture, which is contained in the right hemisphere, we have to do something very simple. We have to take a breath. And when we take a breath, we actually are able to move from our left hemisphere to our right hemisphere. And we're able to move from the single story, black and white, right or wrong, to the larger picture, to getting curious, to actually having compassion and empathy. This is really, really important. This is key here. Once we have a greater level of connection, then we're able to get the other four needs met much more easily. So, trust. The spectrum with trust is transparency and withholding. So once we have a greater sense of connection, both with ourselves and with others around us, then we are able to show up much more openly, right? Well, I had a headache, I'm so sorry, that's why I couldn't really show up to the meeting, rather than withholding and not willing to disclose, right? Trust also enables us to competently disclose, which is critical in any work environment. And when we have connection, when we have trust, the level of participation only increases, and this is where we can innovate. The spectrum here, as I mentioned earlier, is being authentic, being able to show up as your full self, or perhaps not so much. Holding back, feeling reserved, feeling cautious, not quite sure, uncertain. Yeah? Support is an interesting need because what I've come to find is that clients are far more willing to be generous in giving support and far more reticent in receiving support. And we talk a lot about that in our 3-day engagement. So someone who's not willing to receive a lot of support is the person who says, don't worry, I can do it all. I can do it by myself. I don't need you. And there's a lot of juice there. There's a lot of exploration that we get curious about in that moment. And then finally, integrity. Right? The spectrum here is between being vulnerable and posturing. Vulnerability is really about saying, I don't know. That's it. It's really about getting to a place of being able to say, I don't know, and let me go find a solution, or let me go get the resource, or let me go get the right person. Posturing is about making excuses. Right? It's not wanting to look bad, and underneath all of that is insecurity. So there's a lot of accountability here in integrity. Being aligned with the values, both yourself and the organization and the team, allows you to show up much more vulnerably. Being able to be vulnerable comes from establishing an amazing connection, feeling the trust within the team, being able to contribute uniquely as you are meant to, and then knowing that you are supported by a collective. That's being vulnerable. When we find that all of these 5 connections are being met beautifully, we can have a different story. We move out of all the single stories that we used to have, and we have completely different stories, a completely different experience. And this is the core of disruptive diversity. When we are able to tell ourselves a new story, to get outside of the black and white, the right or wrong, the yes or no, we are actually able to cultivate new brain cells. For a long time, scientists thought that new brain cells were only being able to be generated by children's brains, but that's no longer true. There's a TED Talk by Sandrine Touré that talks about neurogenesis, how adults are able to form new brain cells. And we get there by telling ourselves a whole new story. And when we're able to tell ourselves a whole new story, the possibilities are absolutely endless. So this framework that I built from the ground up, this disruptive diversity framework, is built on really establishing a solid inner foundation. And we do that by extrapolating the nuggets from 6 core methodologies that I've found. Interpersonal Neurobiology by Daniel Siegel, Vulnerability and Shame by Brene Brown, and this feeds the brain category. Empathic Language for Business, this is an adaptation from Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication. And Sue Johnson's Emotional Freedom Therapy, and this feeds the psyche. Bert Hellinger's Family Constellation Model, and Deepak Chopra's 7 Spiritual Laws, and this addresses the spirit. And then we take all of that and we encode it right here into your body at a neurobiological structure, right, at a cellular level. Disruptive diversity is also based on 3 core principles, and that is self-management, wholeness, and evolutionary purpose. Self-management is the ability to know when to vacillate on that spectrum, to know which strategy to employ at that moment given your situation. Wholeness is about having the awareness of whether or not your need is being met, and then the ability to go and grab the correct strategy to get that need met. Yeah? An evolutionary purpose is about creating the passion. It's about creating the movement that drives the corporate citizen, that allows you to notice that an organization is actually a living, breathing organism, and to allow it to grow and scale in the ways that it wants to, rather than ways that you're forcing it to. This is critical, and we talk a lot about that on the on-site engagements. Taking all of these three principles generates a radical self-worth foundation. And this is what disruptive diversity is all about. If you find yourself constantly proving your worth, you have already forgotten your value. This is a quote that I very much live by. When you come to a deep place of knowing that you're valued, that you matter, and that you belong, you can absolutely accomplish anything. And this is what disruptive diversity is all about. Radical self-worth.